rank.
Is he spitting?
He's spitting.
Oh, he's spitting at them. Is that the sign?
Sign.
Spit!
What is going on? It is always sunny here at Adjust the Ranks. We have a very special guest for you who we'll get to in just a minute, but just a couple of quick matters of business before we do. First of all, we are running a Superflex tight end premium 4-round rookie mock today with this guy right here. And if you want to get in on more mocks like this with us, we have an amazing schedule ahead. Dave starts us off. We got another Dave coming up on Saturday, and you can see the list of names that we're excited to bring to you here in April at Adjust the Ranks. We also have a Discord that we are opening up on April 5th. So we really appreciate you. If you just want to come talk ball with us, we're not really selling anything. We're just sitting here, a bunch of guys, myself, Jesse Moeller, Dynasty Dog Mike, SC Romero, and we're just in there talking ball a bunch. So we appreciate you joining us here on Adjust the Ranks. We appreciate Dave joining us here on Adjust the Ranks. Dave Kluge, of course, of the Football Guys. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today, sir?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me. Like I said, we were talking a little bit pre-show. This is a fun time of year where my workload slows down a little bit. I get the opportunity to meet new people like you in the industry. So this is always a ton of fun. And mock drafts, nice and easy. You know, I went ahead and preloaded all of my rankings into the queue. So you and I can have some good discussion and hopefully make some picks here that we can have some fun talks about.
I love it. And I feel a little bit like Drew Carey on what's the name of that show? The Whose Line Is It Anyway? Where like, the show is the games are made up and the points don't matter because at this stage in the offseason, right, we all have our rankings. We love our guys. We hate certain guys, but none of it really matters until that draft capital comes through. And yes, it's just another piece of the puzzle, but it's kind of that really important piece that solidifies it all together. Oh, NFL teams agree with me and believe what I believe, or NFL teams do not agree with me. And then we have to reshuffle, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I do use draft capital as my guiding metric. I saw that you have JJ Zacharyson coming on the show in just a couple of weeks as well.
Yep.
And he is also another guy who kind of uses that. And I think what you
Sure.
want to do is try to find, draft capital is kind of the guiding light. But then from there, you can look at the guys, two guys that are drafted in the same round. If one of them has, pass catching upside, you're going to like that more than the guy who profiles for early down work. So you can kind of start splitting hairs once we get the draft capital. But I still think it's really important this time of year to learn about these incoming prospects as much as you can, just because then when they do hit the field, you can see whether your priors were right or wrong. And then, of course, you readjust after the draft, you readjust after year one, you readjust again after year two. But that's what makes this so fun, is that you're constantly just intaking new information and trying to change your rankings as you get that.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's kind of what I'm just trying to be here, is get all the info from all the experts, because I don't do a ton of digging this time of the year. My time of year is more specialty, is May, June, July, in redraft and dynasty streets. But I know a little bit what I'm talking about here, but that's why we have the experts on to share with you all of their expertise and knowledge here. Before we get going here, I do have a question for you, Dave. I saw you dropped your mock draft 2.0. I saw some of the names that you slotted into the first round. So just kind of as for anyone who might not have seen it, you have, let's see some interesting ones here. Tyler Warren to the Jets at 7, Tet to Carolina at 8, Genty to the Saints at 9, which isn't the most popular landing spot. I thought that was interesting. Any of those names or any other names in the first round that you thought were really interesting in terms of fantasy, where, one of those names might land for you?
Well, I don't go too crazy with my mock drafts. I try to look at, where the consensus is ranking these guys, team fits, and things of that nature. I threw one really spicy pick in there because every single year, right? Like we do all these mock drafts and they all look identical. And then the draft happens and there's always that one, like, what the hell happened there? Like, where did that pick come from? So I always try to put one of those in my mock drafts. Jalen Milroe to 21, to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the one, they're still waiting on Aaron Rodgers, and it sounds like they are hoping to get a deal done. But, you look at the types of quarterbacks that they've tried to bring in last year with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and now they've got DK Metcalf and George Pickens playing on opposite sides, two guys that can really stretch the field vertically. A guy with an arm like Jalen Milroe and his rushing upside could make sense. Now, he might still be there in round 2, and they might not have to pay up in round 1. But if things don't work out with Aaron Rodgers, I don't think the Steelers want to go into week 1 with Mason Taylor and Skylar Thompson fighting for that QB1. So they might get a little bit desperate in April. And who knows? I mean, it's an eye-popping selection for sure, but we see those happen every single year.
I love that. Love the spiciness. Jackson Dart truthers, myself included, eat your hearts out. Jalen Milroe in the first round. Mason Taylor also in the first round of the Chiefs at 31. I love that. Noah Gray, I believe they took somebody last year as well at the tight end position, but it seems like we can't get enough of the tight end position in the NFL. The Colts have proven that you need to draft 12 guys and roster them all and then play none of them.
Yeah, and I think Mason Taylor would make a lot of sense. And you're right. I think it was last year. Yeah, they went out and they got Jared Wiley in the fourth round. But Mason Taylor, he's been a huge riser for me. You know, I start my kind of rookie scouting process looking at the numbers, and then the numbers kind of tell me who to watch. And Mason Taylor, if you look, you know, he didn't do a ton as far as production, but then once you start watching him play, my goodness, the guy is 6'6", almost 260 pounds. He's got the fluidity of a slot receiver, still just 20 years old too. I mean, he's going to be getting drafted at the same age that Kyle Pitts was. This is going to be one of those things where Mason Taylor is going to get drafted this year. He'll be hitting the end of his rookie contract at 24 years old. Such a young player with physical room to growth, but also, you know, he can develop some skills that he might not have right now. So I think that when you look at the bloodlines he comes from with his dad and his uncle, that's the type of guy that NFL teams are going to want to take a shot on. And when I first started doing this, looking at the numbers, he was kind of a day 3 guy, then moved up to a day 2 guy, then a round 2 guy. And now I'm consistently mocking him at the end of the first.
I love it, and it doesn't hurt that Daddy's a Hall of Famer, like you referenced, and multi-sport athlete, I believe, as well. Played a bit of basketball, so yeah, the athleticism is definitely there. So love that. If you haven't checked it out, obviously, you don't need me to tell you where that is from Dave. Go check out Mock Draft 2.0, I think, over on Football Guys. But let's get to it now. The main event here. We're going to begin the draft in just a minute. But Dave, first, as we always like to do. If I can get it. No, wait. Hey, all right. We got technology working. I am notoriously terrible with the tech, but we are going to pickerwheel.com, not a sponsor, and we are going to spin the wheel, Dave, just to give us a little bit of context behind this rookie draft. Of course, we have our rankings. Of course, we know where we want to take guys in a vacuum. The thing is, we never draft in a vacuum. So certainly, we're not advocating here that you follow a strategy all the way through a draft, but at the same time, you need to make sure that, you know, hey, a little bit of context. If I have a need at quarterback, maybe I take Shedeur Sanders a little bit earlier than I normally would, right? If I have a need at tight end, maybe a guy like Mason Taylor looks really good to me a round or 6 picks earlier. So the question I have to ask you first here, Dave, is do you want to spin or do you want to defer?
You know what? Let's spin and make it fun. I'll hope we get best player available, but for the sake of entertainment, let's go ahead and spin the wheel.
I love it. Here we go. You have to have fun with this. It's fantasy football after all. And let's see what you got. You are positioned,
all right.
And we're going to determine that. Ridiculous, but why not? We all need a little ridiculous in our life. Number 2, where are you positioning Needy? Let's find out.
Oh, this is a good class to be needy for a running back in. I like that.
That's it. Gotta love it. So yeah, absolutely running back here, needy. And certainly, like you said, it's a great class. The best class, at least since 2017, perhaps, and beyond. 2017 actually is an interesting class. We might get into that later with Aaron Jones, Chris Carson going late. You know, and those guys ending up being contributors. So do we think we have a day 3 guy who can contribute here? I don't know, but let's see how the board falls and we'll talk about it and get into it as we go along. Let me spin the wheel because why not? What show wouldn't be complete on Adjust the Ranks without another wheel spin? What are we doing here? We are winning now. I hate this strategy, but it's always good in Dynasty to be in a win now mode because that means you have a chance. You don't have to rebuild. You can trade away those picks. And in this case, it's almost the best player available. But personally, I like a little safety in my rookies, guys who I think can come in and contribute right away, as opposed to guys who might be a little bit more developmental. All right, let's remove that. So, Dave, real quick, as I set things up here, what are you thinking in terms of your position neediness at running back? Are you thinking, and maybe you're thinking this in all rookie drafts, are you just hammering running back, or is it something where maybe you'll be a little bit more selective and try to kind of get value in the later rounds?
I think you can do a little bit of both. Picking here at 3 does set me up to take, a really, really good running back. I've got 3 that are kind of in a tier of their own in this draft. However, there's another guy on 3 that'll be tough to pass on if he is on the board. So, this is a deep class, and it's also a very top-heavy class, which you don't get often. Typically when we hear about a good positional class, it's that you've got some really good guys up at the top, or you've got some really good guys that are going to fall in day 3. This class has both. I mean, we're looking at the 3 guys atop the list: Ashton Jeanty, Hampton, and Travion Henderson, that I think can all be immediate RB1s coming into the league. But then once you start looking at some of the day 3 guys, I can go all the way down to like Taj Brooks, who I think a lot of people have like outside of their top 20 running backs, I could see being an immediate contributor. I think this is one of those draft classes that's going to come in and just completely reshape the running back landscape.
Yep, I love it. Guy names like Bashal Tutin. We'll
Yep.
see how far guys like Dylan Sampson or RJ Harvey, some of those kind of those middle round, cream of the crop kind of guys, tend to fall. We always see kind of teams a little bit more hesitant to take running backs, although the league is changing with more and more committees. Pretty much we're at like 80% committee at this point in the NFL. I don't think that's going to change, but will be interesting here. Before we begin, let's just jump in. Jamie, what is going on? You are ranking your rookie RBs. That's great. Too bad you won't get Hampton, Dave, because I guess Jamie is picking before you. Jesse says he's all yours. So we already have some Hampton debates here. So we're going to start it up and we'll see how it all shakes out. And Dave, you'll be on the clock here with Jamie ahead of you. So let's fire it up. Again, Superflex, tight end premium, PPR, of course. Rookie draft, we're going 4 rounds and 60 seconds per pick. And Chick-fil-A sauce is on the clock. So, Dave, maybe 30 seconds here about Amari and Hampton and your thoughts.
I think he's a great player, and I think a lot of people we've heard NFL teams have Omari and Hampton ahead of Ashton Jeanty, and when you look at the extra 3 inches and 20 pounds, it does make sense. He's got a very NFL-ready frame. For me here, this is really tough because I have Cam Ward ranked as my 101 in rookie drafts. And I know that we're spinning here for positional need, and I've got this running back needy team, but I still can't pass on Cam Ward here. Like I said, I've got him as first off the board. For the sake of this game, if I had the 101, I'd have taken Jeanty, but I just can't pass on Hampton here, especially with some of the depth in the running back class later on here. I did a big study last year on how draft capital correlates to career production. And the reality is that a quarterback getting drafted 101, which everything Tennessee has done so far has signaled that they're planning to draft Cam Ward 101, those quarterbacks have an 81% chance of starting 5+ years in the league. You're not getting that from any other position, that sort of security. Now, Cam Ward might not have the elite rushing upside that we want to see, but when you're given that sort of leash as a number 1 overall pick, if it works out with Tennessee, great. If it doesn't work out with Tennessee, there's another team out there that is almost assuredly going to take another chance on that skill set. So I think that with how good Ashton Jeanty, Omari Hampton, and Travion Henderson are, a lot of people have just kind of dug in that those are the guys that need to go off the board early. But for me, if a quarterback is going 101 in the NFL draft, he's got to be the 101 in a rookie draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. And even recently, we've seen guys like Baker Mayfield. Well, maybe not so recently for Baker in terms of when he was drafted, but also Bryce Young, right? These guys tend to just need a little extra time at times. Even Trevor Lawrence, regardless of their production, they're retaining value in fantasy as long as they produce a little bit. So I agree with you there 100%. The 101 at quarterback is a guy you want to invest in. Now, the 102, 103, or 104, we've had our Zach Wilsons and Trey Lances of the past. So maybe not those guys, but the first guy off the board should be the guy as Travion Henderson goes there at the 106. Dave, we have 3 running backs. We have Travis Hunter at the 104, potentially spicy. We have Tyler Warren and your Cam Ward. How do you feel about these first 6 picks here? And what did you expect? What do you see here and how you feel?
No, I think the Travis Hunter pick is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. I've seen him typically falling into the beginning to end or beginning to middle of round two, but Matt Harmon dropped that reception
Yeah.
perception profile yesterday with just the Christmas tree all green, and that gets people really excited. And this is something I talked with Jeff Bell about. We host the Dynasty show together over at Football Guys. And I think right now it's the uncertainty with Travis Hunter. Is he going to play cornerback? Is he going to play wide receiver? I think that has people nervous. All we need is an answer, though. If he goes top 3 in the draft, which you almost can ink him in for, if he goes top 5 in the draft, all those concerns are going to be quelled. So right now we play this weird psychological game where we try to avoid uncertainty. But once he's drafted, where we almost are certain he's going to be drafted, then we're going to feel better about drafting him there. So yeah, I understand why he's falling, but I think that this going at 104 makes a lot more sense than where I typically see him going at like 204.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Where do you have Travis Hunter ranked between him, Tet, potentially Golden? I'm not. Who are your top couple of wide receivers right now for fantasy?
It's so tough because these guys are all really, really flat that when you start ranking them, it's not easy. I've got Travis Hunter as my wide receiver 5, so I've kind of got him towards the end of round 1. Ted McMillan, though, he's been my wide receiver 1 for a long time. It's almost impossible to ignore the fall that he's been having recently. Daniel Jeremiah just released his top 50 players, and he had Ted McMillan ranked as the wide receiver 4 in this group. I love Emeka Egbuka. I'm still holding on to faith for Luther Burden, even with some of the concerns about his analytical profile. Matthew Golden, he's starting to get steam as a top 12, top 15 pick. So I've got Hunter behind just because, like I said, the uncertainty. And I think one thing that doesn't get discussed with Hunter is that we're not going to get a clear picture of what his role is going to be after the draft, because Dable could get fired after this year. He could get traded to a different team. Every new coaching staff is going to have to kind of reevaluate how they want to deploy him, which does make him a little scary.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. And, if he goes somewhere like, right now, I don't think he's getting to the Raiders at 6 or 7. I forget where they are. So, Travis Hunter is a top probably 4 guy. If he's still on the board and my Patriots pass him up, that's problems. But, but for sure, like he's got to go in one of those top 4 picks. And if he goes to the Patriots, we can say, oh, that's really nice. More or less wide open wide receiver room, especially for the long term there. But if he goes somewhere, where
Giants,
maybe it's a touch more crowded. Oh, the Giants would be nice as well. Yeah.
Well, I think the Giants have more of a pressing need at quarterback right now than they do at wide receiver.
True.
They've got Malik Neighbors. They brought Darius Slayton back. They've got Wan'Dale Robinson. They lost to Dory Jackson. And Deontay Banks, their current number 1 cornerback, has been pretty terrible since he came into the league. So that's one of the situations where if he goes there, they might have more of a pressing need to line him up on defense than as a wide receiver.
Yeah, that's fair. But look, I'm just over here with my Christian Gonzalez and Travis Hunter opposite with Carlton. What's his name? The new guy the Pats signed. Is it Carlton? I don't know. I have to look it up now. They just signed him in free agency. Big signing at corner. But those 3 at corner would absolutely,
Davis, yeah.
Davis, thank you. Would absolutely crush. And it would be super nice for that Mike Vrabel era to begin. At the same time, like you're saying, wherever he goes, he's still going to be primarily a cornerback, at least to start. So potentially crushing our hopes for him in fantasy. We'll have to see what happens there. At the end of the first round here, at the 107, we have Tet McMillan, Shador Sanders, Quinshon Judkins, Jackson Dart, right where I believe he belongs, because I do think he is going to be a round 1 selection. Big omission from your paper. I thought that was the one question I had, was I really think he goes round 1, but he's probably not going round 1 if Milroe goes round 1, that's for sure. So Dart at the 110, I like. Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, and then into the second, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, and you picked Caleb Johnson. How do you feel about this so far?
Well, I want to thank whoever was picking ahead of me that took Colston Loveland. I see in the chat here that they left Caleb Johnson for me, so I appreciate that with this running back needy team that I have. In this situation in a vacuum, I do prefer Trey Harris to Caleb Johnson, but with this being a running back needy team, I think that we have definitely gotten to a point where we're overanalyzing Caleb Johnson a little bit. He came
Right.
out and didn't have the best 40 time imaginable, but running that speed at over 220 pounds still sets him up for nearly an 80th percentile size adjusted speed score. And we know that, he had a lot of breakaway runs in Iowa that might not be breakaway touchdowns at the NFL level, but he still reminds me of a Najee Harris type of player that can get
Mhm.
a lot of touches. He hasn't really had much of a history of injury. He can handle 250, 300 touches a season. Might lack some of the upside that we want to see in the receiving game, but we have seen players develop that trait over time. Josh Jacobs, I think, is a perfect example. A guy who came into the league as just kind of this plotter, and then as he developed, he started getting more and more involved in the passing game. So Caleb Johnson, just prototypical NFL size and speed. I He's a little bit risky to draft right now because you see some
Mhm.
people saying he's going to be an early round 2 pick. You see other people saying that he might fall into round 3. Every running back is so landing spot dependent, but the size and speed for Caleb Johnson is still alluring.
Yeah. I don't mind that, especially with guys like Devin Neal going right after him. You did mention Trey Harris, your guy Mason Taylor there as well, but you see the other running backs off the board: RJ Harvey, Dylan Sampson, Cam Scatabo. So when you're talking about these guys, it seems like they're all kind of packed into this middle, who knows what at the moment. I think a lot of us are going to let the NFL decide where we kind of view them in terms of where they land and where they're selected. But a lot of similar issues, all guys with a couple of scars on their resume, I'd say.
Yeah, and RJ Harvey is the guy for me that it's tough
Yeah.
to move him higher than where I have him already. He's my RB6 right now, and I've kind of contemplated moving him ahead of Caleb Johnson, but I just can't do that. Caleb Johnson has the size that RJ Harvey doesn't. But man, you want to talk about a profile that's just made for just sucking up fantasy points. It's RJ Harvey. I mean, this guy had the second most breakaway runs in the FBS last year behind only Ashton Jinty. Just has been a touchdown machine through his entire career so far at UCF. He can catch passes as well. RJ Harvey is a guy that I'm really, really enamored with. I was hoping he'd make it to me in round 3, but this is a guy who was going in round 4 a month ago. Then he started creeping up
Mhm.
into round 3. And now, if you're not taking him in round 2, you're probably not getting him.
Yeah, absolutely love the RJ Harvey pick, and he's just kind of like a little bowling ball out there. I'm not going to say he plays like it, but looks a little bit like Maurice Jones-Drew out there,
Yeah.
just with the
Yeah.
that size discrepancy. But for myself, I went Matthew Golden in the first, Jalen Noel in the second. I just like the opportunity that I think these guys are going to have in the NFL immediately. Of course, we need the landing spots to cooperate. If Golden goes to Dallas, as people like yourself and others are mocking him to go, I think that's super interesting. And he's got production written all over him in year one, assuming health of Dak and everybody else over there in Dallas. But then Jalen Noel, I just think he pops and he's interesting. I know people prefer Higgins, and that's an interesting conversation to have. But I prefer Jalen Noel over guys like Trey Harris, over guys like Luther Burden. So I'm happy to get him at the end of the second.
Yeah, I love Jalen Noel. Like, he was one of the guys that as soon as I started watching him, it was just like, how is this guy not ranked higher in consensus rankings? I've got him as my wide receiver 6 right now in this class.
Nice.
I see a lot of Golden Tate in his game where he is just
Mhm.
a vicious route runner. He could also make huge plays after the catch. He's a little guy who still comes down with contested balls as well. I mean, he's one of those guys that you look at the production and, he actually had more receiving yards than Jaden Higgins last year at Iowa State. So the production was there. We know he can play well. I think the size is going to concern some people, but you just got to watch him play. He plays with tenacity that not a lot of NFL receivers have.
Yep, I love that. And you are getting some compliments in the chat. Best voice in the business. Hard to disagree with takes like that in the offseason. But let's talk about this. RJ Harvey will be 25 this season. He's an older prospect, but we have NIL. We have things like COVID, which is still affecting classes like this. How do we feel about the age of these prospects and what we usually like to see those younger guys, like you mentioned, I forget who it was, who's 20 coming out. I know Colson Loveland's one of those guys. We have younger guys coming out, but we got older guys too.
Yeah, RJ Harvey is a little bit older. He will be he just turned 24 years old. So, when we look at what age they're playing at, usually the rule of thumb is what they are at the end of that calendar year. So whatever age they are and December 31st. And RJ Harvey, this will be his age 24 season. He's definitely getting up there in age. And he also had a lot of workload in college, but still, I look at experience that he had in college is just, more reason for him to be a pro ready guy that can immediately step in and contribute. Of course, the age is nice. And I think that if RJ Harvey was 20 years old or 21 years old, we'd probably be talking about him as a first round pick. That's really
Mhm.
the only knock on his profile, though. You even talk about the size a little bit. He's the same height and he's only 5 pounds less than Ashton Jinty. So I mean, Ashton Jinty, the consensus 101, is still a guy who has the same size concerns that we have with RJ Harvey. I don't get too concerned by the age, like you said, with the COVID years, especially. That's going to be a more common thing that we see these 24,
Yeah.
25-year-old rookies coming in. And I think last year, Bo Nix, totally different position, of course, but we had been so scarred by that Brandon Whedon pick in Cleveland years ago that nobody wanted to draft the older quarterback anymore. And we saw Bo Nix come out last year and immediately look good on an NFL field. So I think that age that has scared drafters away in previous years isn't going to be quite as important anymore.
Yep, I agree with that, and I think we do need to just make that adjustment in our brains as well. Yes, these guys are old, but let's just dampen that a little bit. It's all a piece of the puzzle, but let's just dampen that a little bit as we kind of go through the process. We'll see what the NFL says about age to us as well. We look at the end of the second round here. So Harvey, Sampson, and Scatabo. Or Scataboo. Anyway, it's Cam, and he can catch the ball. Alec Ayamanor went at the 210. Jalen Milroe at the 211, right where I think he probably belongs, unless, of course, he goes in the first round to the Steelers, in which case he's going to shoot up the board, and Null at the 212. We see the third round here. We've got Bond, who was really a combine faller for a lot of people, totally off my board and off some people's boards, but the production was still there, so can't ignore him completely. Higgins at the 3-2. And then you chose Terrence Ferguson. As I make my pick here, why don't you tell us a little bit about Ferguson at the 303?
Ferguson is a guy that I'm just obsessed with, like probably more than I should be. But he was the guy, when I first started doing this, I try so hard to unplug from what other people are saying and how other people are ranking and try to come to my own opinions. And I had Terrence Ferguson as my tight end too when I finished all of my rookie scouting this year. He's just such a good receiver. And he checked the athleticism boxes as well with a 9.8 RAS at the NFL Combine. Another really fun metric about Terrence Ferguson is that he averaged 9 yards after the catch per reception last year, led all FBS tight ends. And that's what I want to see in tight ends who are going to the NFL, guys who can make plays after the catch. And that's all he did at Oregon. They used him on a lot of these crossing in breaking routes where he was able to catch the ball at full speed and then continue to go upfield. He was a big play machine. Now, he doesn't necessarily have the blocking chops that we want to see for NFL tight ends, but he is such a good and polished receiver that I think he's one of those guys that can play consistently out of the slot, which is what we want to see in fantasy, and rack up a ton of points. So I expect Colston Loveland and Mason Taylor to go ahead of him in the NFL draft, but it wouldn't surprise me if Terrence Ferguson is the guy who actually ends up being the most productive receiver of the bunch.
I love that. And I'm actually going to pause the draft just for a second here, just so we can discuss some of these tight ends here. So after Warren and Loveland, it tends to be a choose your flavor. We had Mason Taylor at the 206, Ferguson, as you just discussed, but Harold Fannin and Elijah Arroyo, I think, are also names at the top of some people's lists, vying for that tight end 3. How do you feel about this group of 6 here? Would you add anyone? And, who do you think has the opportunity to maybe pop right away?
I think Fannin, based on what we saw from Bowling Green, over 1,500 receiving yards
Crazy.
last year, he was just an absolute menace, and he performed against some of the best defenses that they played against too. Like, it's not like he was just beating up on lowly competition. So I think people see the combine score, and that's going to concern them, as it should, because when it comes to offensive skill players that we care about in fantasy football, none have more of a correlation to relative athleticism than tight ends do. So for him to come out and not look great at the combine was concerning. But even that in a vacuum, I don't think Harold Fannin looked terrible. It's just that we had Mason Taylor and Terrence Ferguson and Joshua Simon and these other guys who were just really showing out at the combine, and he didn't look quite as good alongside them, but he still did check the requisite boxes that we want to see for athleticism. And then you can look back at the Senior Bowl. He was winning I forget, Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl. I forget which one Fannin was at, but you go back and they're I think it was the Shrine Bowl. But you go back, he was winning every single one of his reps. They were talking about how he was just dominating that week there. We saw him dominate in college. This kind of reminds me of the Xavier Restrepo thing going on right now. Like the production is there, the film is there. Who knows what happened? Maybe he had a glass of milk the morning of the combine that didn't sit right, and that was enough to take 0.05 seconds off his 40 time, and now everybody freaks out and thinks that he's not an athlete. But the reality is, if you watch him play, he's a good athlete. He can break tackles, he can make plays after the catch. I think the upside is still there, and I think that some team is still going to throw a dart on Harold Fannin in round 2.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to let you pick here as I go through the rest of, was that your pick? It was Taj Brooks your pick?
Yep.
Great. All right. So we'll get to that in a second. So Fannin, Gordon, Jalen Royals, the forgotten man amidst all these other guys getting extreme hype now, but that could end up being very good value at the 306. Elijah Arroyo, we have DJ Giddens, Jack Besh, Bashal Tootin, Damian Martinez, and I went with Restrepo at the 312. And then you see Curtis Rourke, which that's an interesting one there. But potentially that is a placeholder for Tyler Shuck or whoever else, or maybe it's a legitimate Curtis Rourke pick. We'll see. Torrey Horton at the 402. He has gone undrafted throughout a lot of my mocks in March here, and now he's starting to creep up into the 4th and even the back end of the 3rd. So I love that. Taj Brooks for you, and we see the rest of the board as it's playing out in real time. Talk to us a little bit about Taj Brooks, Dave.
Yeah, Taj Brooks is a guy that, if you start with the numbers like I do when I'm evaluating these guys, I mean, he was just such a productive player last year, and he doesn't have the huge breakaway speed, and that is a little bit concerning. But, when I watch him play, I see a guy who is just a technician with his footwork. And then he came out at the NFL Combine, and the 2 drills that I was most excited about watching Taj Brooks in were the 3-cone and the shuttle, and those are the drills that we know have the strongest correlation to NFL production for running backs, and he checked elite grades in both of those drills. And then you watch him doing the on-field drills with the other running backs, whether it was, jumping over boxes or through whatever it was. He just consistently had some of the best and quickest feet in this class. So he's another guy that I think people look at the age. He's about to turn 23 years old. They look at the usage in college. He had a lot of touches, and I think that scares some people away. But when it comes to being a pro-ready running back, Taj Brooks is a guy that I think might fall to day 3 because of his age, but he is a guy that can immediately carve out a big role in an NFL backfield.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. And you also have names like, I'm scrolling through here, Marcus Yarns. We have Brashard Smith, who was just taken, Jaden Blue as well. So some of these undersized guys who have a chance. It's really interesting here in the 4th round. Just like Ferris says, Rourke played on a torn ACL, and it's the 401. Yes, we are taking dart throw shots here at all these guys for sure. So there's no supreme hate on any of these picks. And certainly we don't know how it's going to go. Oh, we got Shug in here. He's actually in the draft. Way to go, sleeper.
I got to say, my guy, Jeff Bell, my co-host on the Dynasty Show, has been a big Curtis Rourke fan. And he talks about, the injuries have been making it tough to evaluate him because he's played through so many. He also, if I recall, I think he had a broken hand or broke a bone in his hand this year that he was playing with as well. I mean, he has had a litany of injuries throughout his college career. But yeah, in a Superflex draft in the 4th round, why not take a dart on a guy who could potentially end up a round 2, round 3 pick and might end up in a starting role at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see how the rest of the 4th round went. We've got names like Kyle Williams, who probably wasn't there a couple of weeks ago. Now he's some people's wide receiver 2s overall in the class. So very interesting there. Brashard Smith, who I love. I did consider him at the 312. I think that is great value there. Anyone you see here in the 3rd or 4th round, Dave, who you really feel like is a great value kind of outside of the picks that you made?
Really like Jalen Royals. He's a wide receiver that I loved as soon as I watched him. He had a great Senior Bowl as well. Also came out at the NFL Combine and checked the elite measurables that we wanted to see in athleticism. So Jalen Royals is a guy that might be relegated to slot duties, but he is just such a good player after the catch. Just plays with a lot of strength. So I really, really like him. Jack Besh, another guy who, combine riser, but a guy that I liked quite a bit before the combine. Had some questions about his athleticism, came out and answered those. So I like that pick. I like your pick with Restrepo too, because Restrepo is one of those guys that I think was going a lot earlier before he came out and ran, what was it, 4.83, I believe. I mean,
it was not good.
It was bad. It was really, really bad. But he's another one of those guys that we look at all of these little pieces to the puzzle. We've got the college production, we've got the relative athletic score, we've got the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl, we've got film, we've got all of these things. And Restrepo checks pretty much every box except for the 40 time. Like, his agility drills were still good. The college film was there. He's the most productive receiver in Miami football history. I don't know how often NFL players actually get a chance to run 40 yards in a straight line, but if he's able to run routes with the crispness that we saw at Miami, he's going to be just fine in the NFL. So I think that you catching him at the end of the third round was a great value. And then Kyle Williams, you called out as well. I don't even think he was in sleeper last week. They did not have him as a guy that you could select. Not the most productive player, but man, you just watch him play. As Jeff Bell, my co-host, likes to say, he's just a dude. And I say that he plays with the swagger of a wide receiver one. Like, he is just out there making plays consistently. So big fan of that Kyle Williams pick too.
I love it. And yeah, we're still got ADP shaking out, like Michael mentions, right? Tootin just didn't see him there at the 211. He would have taken him if he could do it over. Look, ADPs will normalize. It's still very, very early, and these guys haven't even landed on an NFL team yet. That said, there's still value to be had. So if for some reason you're out there and you're a complete degenerate and doing drafts before the NFL draft, first of all, props to you. Well done. Secondly, yes, look for the ADP value that hasn't quite normalized just yet. A couple of things here from Jamie. Curtis Rourke's brother is in the NFL as a backup, Nathan Rourke. I will add that to items that are interesting, but I will forget in about 10 seconds.
Nathan
here,
Rourke,
Jamie,
go back and watch what Nathan Rourke did in the preseason last year in Jacksonville. He had himself a hell of a preseason game. So don't want to think about it too much, but you got some NFL bloodlines there.
Listen, if I could, make money in fantasy football off of all the guys who had exceptional preseasons, then I would be doing very well. But unfortunately, it's burned me far too often. Jesse says Kyle Williams is going to go earlier than people expect. Do you think that this is true? And earlier than people expect, where do we think that is? Is he a day 3 guy? Does he sneak into day 2? What are we thinking here with Kyle Williams?
I think he could absolutely be a day 2 guy, possibly in round 3. And he's one of those guys that wasn't really on my radar. And again, I feel like I'm just like writing a love letter to Jeff Bell on this show, but we've been doing 2 shows a week, talking a lot about these prospects lately. Yep. Jeff Bell was the one that turned me on to Kyle Williams, and immediately, just search Kyle Williams highlights, and he's doing things out here that not a lot of players can do. And Chris Sims was the one that I think kind of put his name on the map when he came out with his top 5, and I believe he had Kyle Williams at 3 or 4, and I think that rate 2. Yeah, I mean, it raised a lot of eyebrows, but the dude can play, so I really like that. I don't know if he'll sneak into round 2. There's a lot of good players that are going to go in round 2, but I don't think early round 3 is crazy to think at all for Kyle Williams.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just always a little wary because from a fantasy lens, we love to see these guys and where they're going to land, but I feel like I always try to err on the side of caution because I want to push these guys up and up and up. But then we see constantly the NFL, they push all these elite weapons down, and then they end up getting bargains in the 3rd and 4th and 5th rounds and beyond. So, and some of these guys are, Austin Eckler not too long ago was a UDFA. So it can happen. But that's a segue into a question I want to ask you that I've been asking a lot of my guests here is, in the NFL draft, we have situations here where we have these day 3 picks. JJ Zacharyson, who you mentioned earlier, actually did a study on this recently, about a week or 2 ago. This was something I was simultaneously putting on Twitter. So we kind of looked at this from a different lens, but came to the same conclusion, more or less, is that day 3 picks basically do nothing for you in fantasy. And so there's zero correlation, right? So it's kind of like, if this is from JJ. So if you pick a guy who was drafted, in the 4th round versus a guy who was drafted in the 7th round, well, it doesn't matter in terms of fantasy production. Those guys can equally hit, but probably equally miss. What are you thinking here in terms of, these day 3 picks and these dart throws that we were just talking about with the Curtis Rourke, why not at 401? What do we think about these dart throws here, and how should we kind of best utilize these 3rd and 4th round picks to maximize fantasy value?
We'll talk a little bit about morality here and whether you want to put your morality aside when you're drafting in fantasy football. But the reality is the day 3 picks that hit are typically guys that
Mhm.
fall for character concerns. Antonio
Mhm.
Brown, Tyreek Hill. So I don't think we have any of those guys in this draft class, but those are
Right.
typically the guys that if they fall into day 3, you want to take the chance on because they fell for a reason and the upside is still there. The other thing that I look for typically is eye-popping athleticism. And, I think Isaac Orendo is a perfect example of the guy
Mm.
who fell to day 3, didn't really get people too excited before the combine, but then he had this off-the-charts athleticism. And then when the opportunity arose, he was able to take advantage of it. That's why Bashaw Tutin, when I watch his film,
Yeah.
doesn't really excite me that much. He's got a fumbling issue. He doesn't have the best feet, but if he lands in a wide zone scheme where they can get him out in space and he has to go cut once and turn upfield, if he's in Miami or if he's in San Francisco, it's really easy to envision the upside there. So once I start looking at these day 3 guys, I'm typically trying to look at scheme fit and age and athleticism and trying to piece together a puzzle where I can tell myself a story of where these guys can break out. I forget. I
Mhm.
think Devon Achan was a round 3 pick, right? I don't think he was a
He was
4th
not
rounder.
round 4. Yeah, he was round 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he was, but he was one of those that was a perfect example where you see exactly what Miami is trying to do. They're trying to build a team where they have fast running backs that they can get in space, and then they go out and they draft the fastest guy in the class. So I was screaming from the rooftops to go out and spend your 2nd-round rookie picks on Devon Achan because it just made a lot of sense. And
Yep.
if Bashaw Tutin, a guy who has off-the-charts athleticism, lands on a team that wants to highlight and a fast wide receiver, that's the guy you want to go after. Now, if Bashaw Tutin lands on a team that already has 2 talented running backs in front of him and the path to relevance is going to be very difficult, probably off my board, but landing spot's very, very important for day 3 guys.
Yep, absolutely. And you really just got to take the swing. Look, if you believe in a guy in the 4th round of your rookie draft, go ahead and take that guy. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But sometimes you end up with Rasheen Ali instead of Tyrone Tracy right here. So you got to be careful with your dozen Rasheen Ali shares and your 2 Tyrone Tracy shares if you really believe that a guy and his situation is going to pan out.
And that's
So,
another one of those things where like there is no universal answer for what you're
yeah.
looking for. Because Rasheen Ali was a guy that I liked as well because he did have the eye-popping athleticism.
Mhm.
Tyrone Tracy was another guy that I liked for completely different reasons. The athleticism wasn't off the charts like Rasheen Ali's, but he was a former wide receiver that
Sure.
was new to playing running back, and we knew that he had the pass catching upside, which is why I had Tyrone Tracy way up in my list. So um, I don't just want to say there's one thing to look for. I think it's you need to look at each of these guys individually and kind of tell yourself a story about the upside case. Easier said than done. If there was
Yep.
one thing to look for, this wouldn't be fun. Like if we knew that, hey, guys who go out and run the best 3-cone drills are going to be the best NFL football players, then it would be pretty boring because we would just be drafting off of everybody's 3-cone time. When the reality is there are so many variables that go into this. So you got to look at every single one on a case by case basis. As boring of a cop out answer as that is.
But it's true, right? So like it may be boring, but it's also true. And sometimes the truth just look, and this is what I was getting crap for. And actually JJ chimed in on it last week is, people were like, oh, we already knew that day 3 picks were scrubs in fantasy. And it's kind of like, well, like, let's just find out. Let's make sure that there's no correlation. Okay, there's no correlation. Now we can move on. Sometimes you just got to kind of do the dirty work just to make sure. Like, listen, Dylan Lobby here. That was another big miss for people, right? There's always some guys who surprise for sure, but you never. The point is, I think, of all of that is it's really, really difficult to know. You don't know. It's really difficult to figure out who that guy is going to be. So why not take your Curtis Rourke, go for it, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
If I did have to make one generic blanket statement on day 3
Please do.
picks, it would be to draft the running backs. Because the reality is that for every Brock Purdy, there's 100 quarterbacks that never step on the field. And for
Yeah.
every Antonio Brown and Tyreek Hill, there's a lot of guys who never make it off the practice squad. Running backs are the most volatile position, and all it takes is an injury for them to get the opportunity. So typically, once I get into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds of my rookie drafts, that's when I'm just kind of spam drafting running
Yeah.
backs and hoarding as many as I can because look at the guys that might not even be good NFL players, but flashback to 2 years ago, Zamir White, Ty Chandler, both day 3 picks. I wouldn't say either of them were exceptionally talented, but they got starting roles in the fantasy playoffs and won a lot of people a lot of money. So
Yeah.
that's typically what I'm looking for with my 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounders. Day 3 running backs before I'm looking anywhere else.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I would add the caveat that once they hit, sell them immediately,
Yes.
because that's really the key here. Is because I think in the study
Don't
that
turn
I
your
did, it
Chase
went back.
Brown into Quinshon Judkins right now.
Exactly, and Tyrone
Yeah.
Tracy, right?
Yes.
It was the I went back 10 years and I looked at all the guys drafted at running back in in rounds 5, 6, and 7. How many running backs do you think, just shot in the dark here, were fantasy viable in that they could hold a spot on your dynasty roster for multiple seasons and be valuable, right? These are very loose parameters.
Yeah.
But in a decade, drafted in rounds 5, 6, and 7, there were 110 running backs drafted in that sample.
I would guess that about 15 to 20 had some
Yeah.
sort of relevance.
It's a good guess. If you include UDFAs, you get there. If you just go 5, 6, and 7, it was 10 guys. So it was roughly 2%. I think if we're
Oh,
generous, I think we can stretch it to 13, but then those names are like Khalil Herbert. So that we have to be very generous in order to include those. Yeah, Bucky was round 4, so he was day 3. But at running back, I did go 5, 6, and 7. So that was the distinction I made at running back. But yes, he was a early day 3 guy. That's the concern. But here's the question for you, Dave. Are we doing the same thing with Bucky? How do you feel about Bucky? Because I love him. I think he's in a great spot, but he is that early day 3 guy. What do you think?
there's a lot of red flags in Bucky's profile, man.
Mm.
Like the athleticism wasn't there, the draft capital wasn't there, but I hesitate so much because all of the concerns that I had about Bucky Irving right now, I had those same concerns about Kyron Williams 2, 3 years ago, and he just keeps making me sit here with egg on my face year after year after year as he just churns out
Yeah,
RB1 seasons. So, um, Bucky Irving, I mean, it's impossible to ignore the film. Like he was very good at Oregon, and he has been very good so far in the NFL. I think it all just comes down to cost, and I know that's just another cop out, but if I can flip my Bucky Irving for any of these top 4 running backs, Ashton Jeanty, Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, and even Quinshon Judkins, I'm doing that without thinking twice. I just don't
okay.
like the idea of selling for the sake of selling. You know, if you're just going to put
Sure.
Bucky Irving on your trade block and take the best available offer, I don't think you should do that. But if you're able to get younger and get a guy who has a safer profile, you should make that move.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. I am a Bucky truther. It looks like we have some in the chat as well. He is efficient, and I'll say he's my dynasty RB6. And all of that said, he's still a running back, right? So,
Yeah.
so what do you do with these guys in dynasty? If you're not competing, you're selling them immediately. If you are competing, you're considering selling them. I think I have a team with who almost won the ship last year, didn't. I'm trying to run it back with Saquon, Bucky, and I think Aaron Jones. And I'm terrified of all of these guys because they could all be fine. They could all even be great. But, it's scary at running back.
Yeah, I did a robust running back startup a few years ago, and it worked out for me. But I'm terrified to ever do it again. But it was me just taking all of these aging running backs that nobody else wanted. Didn't even have to invest early draft capital. Like I was able to get some of my wide receivers and quarterbacks early, but I took Derrick Henry and David Montgomery and Saquon Barkley and these guys that were kind of falling into rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6. And when I drafted this team 3 years ago, I thought, well, I've got like a 1 year window to try to win this thing. And I've been competing for 3 straight years. So every once in a while, you do get lucky with running backs, but more often than not, I'm just constantly trying to get younger at that position.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to do it. We have upset the chat immensely on Bucky. Last question about Bucky, and then we'll move on. If Bucky's usage increases, Rashad White largely phased out down the stretch. Who is it?
Sean
Taylor.
Tucker?
Who's Sean Tucker? I don't know
He's
why I
there.
want to say Sean Taylor. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sean Tucker. Yeah, he is there, right? So does he increase his usage in year 3? I think it is. But if Bucky gets all of that, does efficiency go down? We see this with a lot of other running backs, especially at that size, that efficiency dips when the production increases. Yep. It's a concern, right?
Yeah, and especially with how deep this running back class is. I mean, most people who are out here doing like a full 7 round mock draft are putting about 35 running backs out there to get drafted this year. And then you've also got the UDFAs coming in. So we like to think that we know exactly how the draft is going to shake out. And I think one of the biggest edges that you can get in Dynasty is kind of trying to pivot away from the consensus opinion. And I think that people look right now at the Tampa Bay roster and they say, well, they got Bucky Irving, who's awesome. They've got Rashad White, who's a pass catching back, and they've got Sean Tucker, who can kind of be that third down back that can, or the third back that can come in and kind of do it all. But we also have to remember that they went out and they hired a new head coach this year, Liam Cohen. And if you look at how Liam Cohen deployed the running backs last year in Jacksonville, they very much so took a hot hand approach where it would be Travis Etienne for a couple of games, and then it would be Tanks Bigsby for a couple of games. And we never really knew who the running back would be. So we look at these good running backs and we think that they're safe in the draft. But just 2 years ago, we saw the Seattle Seahawks, after striking gold with Kenneth Walker, go out and draft Zach Charbonnet. Just last year, we saw, we thought that the Rams were very safe and secure in what they had in Kyren Williams, and they spent an early pick on Blake Corum. So, and Blake Corum might not have done much as a rookie, but he's still there, and we might see that role grow this year. They might start planning for life after Kyren Williams when his contract ends after this season. So we look at Bucky Irving now, and everybody is so enamored by the efficiency and the big plays last year, but they've got a new coach there. And with how good this class is, if they go out and they draft a Caleb Johnson in round 2, or if they take an RJ Harvey in round 3, then all of a sudden Bucky Irving plummets in price. So I think that it's just good practice now to try to sell these guys while they're at peak value, because if they don't draft a running back in April, Bucky Irving's value isn't going to go up. But if they do draft a running back, his value is going to plummet.
Yeah. No arguments there. The other thing to consider is that Tampa Bay, like you said, with all the tumult of the coaching changes there, we don't know that it's going to work next year. We don't know that the defense is automatically going to be, as bad as it's been. Maybe they improve on that side of the ball as well, just leading to lesser need for the offense to kind of go out and do things. I know that probably helps the running game, but then again, it does not help the offense if the defense is good in general. Let's get you out of here on this, Dave. If we are looking at the board here, how about a couple of drafts overall with the values you've seen off the board, 1 or 2 that you really like?
On this board right here, overall, I love the Mason Taylor pick. That's a good one, especially if he gets that round 1 draft capital. Already talked about RJ Harvey. I think that's a good pick. But Shedeur Sanders is another one, falling to 108. I think right now there's a lot of concern. We heard, it seemed like just a month ago, people were saying ooh, maybe Shedeur Sanders is actually a day 2 pick. And now every single mock that you see has him going to either number 2 or number 3. So again, I looked at how draft position correlates to fantasy production over the course of a career. And we do see that quarterbacks drafted 1 are going to be more successful than quarterbacks drafted 2, and they're going to be more successful than quarterbacks drafted 3. There's a direct correlation there, but a guy going top 3, of course, we're going to remember the Trey Lances and the Zach Wilsons and the Sam Darnolds. But I think Sam Darnold is kind of a perfect example of why you do want to draft these guys. Because even if it doesn't work out, if Cleveland takes him 2 overall and he face plants there, he still has the tools that made him a top 2 pick, and another team might try to retread that in the future.
Yep. Absolutely. I love that. And I love Jamie's draft here. Amarian Hampton, Colston Loveland in the 2nd round. I think he's the top or back end of the 1st round talent, because he will be a 1st round tight end. Whether he takes a longer time to get there, we'll see. But in a tight end premium league, I like that. Jaden Higgins at the 302 does not belong in the 3rd round. And Torrey Horton is climbing the chart. So I really like that draft as well. And then you look at the
question. I'm sorry, by the way. You're asking for my favorite picks. Favorite teams. I like Jesse Mollers. I think that he knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. Absolutely. You want to talk a little bit about Cam? You already talked about Besh. Do you want to talk a little bit about Cam?
Yeah, you mentioned that he can catch passes, and I think that's the one thing that gets overlooked. They see the build, and they see everybody sees that he is just a big, thick guy who breaks a lot of tackles, and they've just assumed that he is the next coming of Mike Allstott. But this dude caught so many passes at Arizona, and he can be a 3-down back. So I've dropped him to RB7 in my rankings, but that might sound terrible. But given how deep this class is, all that means is that RJ Harvey had elite athleticism. Cam Scatterbo didn't, and I flip-flopped those 2, but still a very good back who is going to probably go out on day 2 and has the skill set to be an immediate contributor. Already talked about Judkins, the most athletic running back in this class, believe it or not, based on his relative athletic score. Jack Besh talked about him. Not crazy about the Savion Williams pick, but in round 4, that's the type of bet you want to make. He's on a guy with elite size and elite athleticism.
Yeah, Cordero Patterson 2.0, right? That's what we're all hoping for. But if anybody from round 4 really gets beyond special teams, then I think you've hit a home run regardless. Quinshon Judkins at the 109. Stop it, guys. Let's make sure we get him up into the top 7 at least. But we have some fallers already. Travis Hunter in the early first will do that. I was looking for his name just a minute ago, but I don't have the full name right now. It's the guy before Jesse at the 108, the 2 Nawa. I don't have the full name here, but Shadur Sanders at the 108. We're assuming he goes top 5 at this point. Certainly he could fall, but he's a first round lock and probably the second quarterback off the board. If that's the case, he needs to be a little higher than 108 in Superflex. Dylan Sampson, I love him. He's a great inside runner. He proved that he can catch the football, even though that wasn't something he was really asked to do a ton of. It's not fluid. It doesn't look great, but he can catch the football, and he proved that at the combine. That's what I wanted to see from him. So I like him in the late second. DJ Giddens, everyone's falling in love with him, his athleticism, his profile. It's hard not to. And then, of course, Brashard Smith. So I love that draft with a lot of upside shots at running back as well. Cool. So on that, let's cut it off here, Dave. I really appreciate you joining us. I'm going to do a second or two of my promo, and then we will get into yours if you don't mind. We are Adjust the Ranks from the fantasy football universe. Of course, we are here all off season long doing a bunch of drafts like this. So if you like this content, please like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube. We're over on Twitter. We're doing a bunch of things this off season, like inviting guests like Dave Kluge and others. Dave Gautieri on Saturday, JJ Zachariason, we got Tom, we got Andrew Erickson, we've got the team coming in just after the draft. And of course, we have our Discord that is dropping this Saturday. If you'd like to be a part, just come on in and talk ball with us. Please do so, and look out for all information on Fantasy Football Universe, Adjust the Ranks on all platforms. And of course, the wonderful Dave, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you so much. And can you just tell us where, the 2 people who are here watching this, who do not know where to find you, tell them where they can do that.
Yeah, real simple. Just find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, Kluge. That's where I share all my content. I'm exclusively over at Football Guys now, have been for this will be my 5th season with Football Guys now. My goodness, how time flies. But you can find mock drafts. I host the Dynasty show. I host the Fantasy Football show. I'm a regular guest on the other shows as well. And then all my articles can be found right there at footballguys.com.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Really good stuff, and just always pumping out the work. So appreciate you, Dave, so much for stopping by. Appreciate you, Jamie, and everyone else in the chat for stopping by. Thank you so much. We are Adjust the Ranks. This is Dave. I'm Jeremy. We will get out of here, and we'll see you next time.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.